Topping Talks. 105 hours a week, can't be beat. Welcome to Topping Talks. Topping Talks is a Topping Tribune production. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Topping Technologies. Topping Technologies is an IT value-added reseller and services company with a special proficiency in IT security. Heck, I see their founder at least twice a day. Gotta say he's quite handsome and brilliant. He's me, you see, that's the joke. If you're an IT leader or a business owner, you can reach out to the team at sales@toppingtechnologies.com. Also, still giving away a free Flamethrower with every IT purchase with Picatinny rail adapters. So you can mount it to any standard AR-15 like all awesome accessories can be. Go to toppingtechnologies.com and click the Flamethrower button to learn more and see me shooting a flamethrower. Now, without further ado, today I'm proud to say I'm interviewing Amahde Duncan, who is the Director of Technology and Procurement Management at CBRE. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So winding back the clock a couple of years, how did you first get into IT?
Yeah, sure. Funny story. I originally went to school for engineering. I wanted to be an engineer. Took a few computer science courses while I was in school, and I just fell in love. I think IT sort of found me more so than I found it.
Do you remember your first computer, or what was that pivotal moment when you were in school and you just saw a computer? You go, that's what's going to be my thing. That's what I love. That's my passion.
You know what? I think it was more or less. So I was in a course where we were just starting to build software. So I think it was more of the software aspect of it, the programming piece, than the actual computer. From a computer perspective, I think the first computer I had was like an old Macintosh. It had a floppy disk, and I don't want to tell you how old I am, but I guess you can get an idea from that. But yeah, so this big thing where the keyboard was just gigantic and the screen's on top. But yeah, that's one of the first computers that I had. But at that point, I was more or less into the aspects of the thing that it does than the actual computer itself. It was more of a fantasy at that point.
I was going to say, was that the Apple II, I think? We had the extra monitor and everything?
Yeah.
Things are iconic.
Yeah, but, it's you see how we went from the Apple II to the Macs that we have today, at least in my span. But how could you not love? How do we go from this to that? That I think those are the amazing things about being in technology these days.
Oh, it's almost a little cliche saying it's like yesterday's sci-fi is today's reality. I mean, you see the first computers out there that are literally the size of suitcases. They're called portable computers. They're not really portable. And now you have like the MacBook Air. It's thinner than a pencil or something crazy like that. Like, it is astonishing how much compute power they can cram into those things these days.
Yeah, it's like when you think about, I really don't want to date myself, but you think about like mainframes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? These mainframe computers. And there are companies that still
IBM,
use those.
IBM still sells them.
IBM, companies like GM, they have these old archaic systems that they just can't get rid of. And you'd be surprised to go into and see a room just with this gigantic mainframe computers. It's amazing.
Oh, there's a reason all the bankers are spiffing like these kids. Like, oh, yeah, we will pay for your college degree. Just learn COBOL because we still need it to keep this stuff working. Please get this degree. Please learn this.
Hey, if you're a COBOL programmer right now, you probably make it at least $250,000 coming out of school. It's an in-demand sort of sourcing or a ability or skill that a lot of people don't have. So I would suggest it to a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. And then what specifically in terms of software when you're in college, was there a specific that you were really passionate about, or what were you building back then?
Yeah, so initially when we got into like building like logic gates, and when you think about, so logic gates, if you're unfamiliar, is basically the ones and zeros that generally tell the computer, it's the bare bones of telling software or computer what to do, right? So for example, just like we had a project that was doing like a countdown, right? So we had to program a circuit. You did it with logic gates. It counted from 10 down to 1, right? So you build these logic gates, low level programming. But going from that to, hey, I programmed the circuit, pop it in, and actually see the countdown. We did it in the lab. I was like, man, this is fantastic. How do we get from building these gates on a PC, programming that circuit, putting it in, and actually seeing a result? It was amazing. It's almost like when you first start programming, probably the first thing you do is like the hello world.
Yeah.
Right. Seeing that, but more physical, like all those different things, just a combination of those things had me. I was just hooked.
That's awesome. Then do you remember what was your very first job once you got that degree?
Yeah, so I started out my career at a company called Morrissey Associates. It was a credentialing software company. I think they're owned by HealthStream at this point. But it's one of those jobs where I think at the end of the time that I left there, my title was an implementation specialist. But when you get in, I was just doing like support. It's one of those jobs where you did sort of everything. And they were at that point from a software company. It didn't have that real startup feel. It had the feel of a very mature company, but they were a small software company. But they had so many different types of clients. A lot of clinics onto like gigantic health systems like, John Hopkins. So they had clients on their software that were using Access, and they had clients that were using Oracle. So you got the gamut of these different things. And at the same time, they were entering into a SaaS model. So they had a product coming out called MSOW, which was a web version of what they were producing at the time. So I got introduced into a lot of different technologies, specifically from the database space, right? So really learning how these different databases worked. Their front end for their initial product at that time was very, very simple, right? Very simple program. The meat was in the data, and learning how to write queries. And you sort of solved all your problems from the back end, right? That's how low level software it was at the time. Because as a support person or even the person implementing, if you're having an issue, actually going in and figuring out the problem, deep in the inner workings of the software itself was a lot of fun, right? It's a challenging job. You had to learn relatively quickly, but I was exposed to so much from just a general technologies perspective. It kind of propelled me to do a lot more things that I would have probably at any other position. And on top of that, they started using, things like crystal reports and things like that. So more advanced reporting. And this was early 2000s. So a lot of the stuff was fairly new to the industry. So it really put me in a position where I could put these skills on my resume and go into other places.
What was your favorite story, or what was the most unusual thing you saw working there that really either made you smile, or just a unique challenge, or?
It wasn't, I worked with some really great people there. I will say it was a lot of different people, right? Normally you go into these software companies, you see sort of the same crowd. As just a story perspective, I think the thing that stood out to me once, and my wife mentioned this to me at the time, that this one of the guys I worked with, he ate the same thing for lunch every day,
Really?
the entire time that I worked there. I would imagine that he still eats this same salad that he was eating at the time. But from a general customer perspective, interacting with customers, you dealt with larger, smaller hospitals, which, and you're talking about the credentialing process, which is an important process of making sure these doctors, have the appropriate credentials to do what they're doing, and you're dealing with HIPAA laws all sorts of things, right? Some pretty sensitive data. So interacting with these hospitals, I think you tend to meet some interesting people. Probably one of the clients that stood out was I don't know if she ran their credentialing department of a hospital, but she was like a big Disney person. So it was the first time I was introduced to the concept of adults going to Disney.
Oh, yeah.
And that whole thing. So that stood out quite a bit. But real interesting place to work, real diverse group of clients. And I think it's probably the first time where I started to just kind of understand this idea of servicing the client will take you far.
Absolutely. And then where was your next role after that?
Yeah, after that, I started a company. It's owned by LexisNexis now. At the time, it was called Interaction. And it going to that company, it was, it's a CRM product, Interaction is. And it has sort of that startup feel, right? You got the drinks in the cafeteria, whole real cool environment. Everybody's great. The CEO's there, and you can go in and talk to him anytime, sit on his couch, or sometimes he's in there sleeping. Those different, that different dynamic of like a small startup in a suburb of Chicago, not necessarily in California, but it was just sort of this good family feel, right, or feel in that company. And I was basically in a consulting role where I helped them implement help clients implement their CRM solution. So they worked with primarily law firms, which was the interest of LexisNexis, because their business is primarily focused on research for law firms. So you had that synergy there, or that just general commonality of a business group, and you can sell them more services. But also an interesting aspect of that company, or at least working there, was the ability to just kind of learn new stuff. Right. So because I had a big database background, that was helpful to just kind of move into that role, because they did work with different databases depending on the client as well. And their front end, a lot more advanced than it was when I was at Morrissey. But we did, as consultants, sometimes our projects were to actually build customizations for the program. So we got to do some actual, programming of the software. You just have to catalog it. It wasn't anything that went out if it went out as a feature, ultimately that would go to the program as a program. But so it's primarily with that client's build, but you actually got to modify and change the product itself for a very specific client. And I thought that was a very fun experience. Now, I will say probably one of the most interesting things that I worked on this project maybe about a month and a half. I'm learning, all these different things. I'm, going through this programming. You were the programmer, you were the tester, you were the deployer. So you had all these different roles all rolled up into one. You're also the implementer. So you're basically this sort of tiny company, so to speak. But I worked a month and a half, something like that, real hard, and delivered it to the client. They're like, I don't know who gave you guys the requirements for this, but we can't use it. This is like, this is no good. We just can't use it, right? It's not something we're sorry, and that was the end of it. And that's the first time that I actually learned from just understanding requirements, understanding that communication that kind of needed to happen between the client throughout the development process. So more of no agile at that point, but more of that sort of back and forth, that feedback loop was necessary. I also learned that regardless of how successful you think a project is, it depends on the client, their ability to actually, utilize what you delivered is so important, right? We were on time, we were on budget, gave exactly what they wanted, at least from a specification standpoint, delivered it, but it just wasn't useful.
Yeah. Oh, that's gotta be frustrating too, because no one likes shelfware.
It's frustrating from the aspect of, you have somebody you report to and you're thinking about how they're going to receive that, right? So did you actually do the job appropriately? And I was probably more worried about that than anything, is how my boss is going to react, more so than the throwaway work. I think as you're programming, you're learning to program, things like that. I think there's a lot of that. And I was in that aspect of my career where I was learning. So I was trying new things. I was spending a lot of my extra time just doing stuff. So I had a ton of throwaway work that I just kind of had to do on my own. So I wasn't too much worried about the fact that I built this useless solution because of what I gained from a knowledge perspective. I was more concerned on how my boss would see it and the type of feedback he would give me based on that. But he understood.
Oh, he's pretty cool?
Oh, yeah. He was awesome. It wasn't... Ultimately, you just kind of learn, I guess it depends on where you are in your career, you kind of learn that, are you where the process breaks down? And at that particular point, I wasn't, right? It should have come out of the initial requirements gathering sessions. I think ultimately they would sold something that we shouldn't have sold, to them. But, that happens. That happens actually more often than not, where as an implementer, you get something from the salespeople that you think the client, this is what they want, but it's not actually what they want. And in many cases, you have to go and figure that out.
Then another half the battle is, how do they translate their needs and, to corporate speak, to tech speak, and just kind of make sure all the ducks are aligned in the row and, managing expectations. And because again, the communication is half the battle.
Yeah, and if you think about from going to, specifically with software solutions, especially if you're going to customize something, having the product itself is just not enough, right? Understanding what the client actually needs versus what they tell you they need is very important. The second piece would be when you started this process, you think about the general sales process. Am I even talking to the same person?
True.
Right. Is this the same person? Do they have the same needs? And is this person in the weeds enough that they truly understand what the end user needs? Right. So in many cases, you have a decision maker that you're working with from a requirements perspective, but they might not have a good idea of how things are actually done on the ground. And that was actually the mistranslation in this case.
Oh, really?
Is somebody's making the decision, but they don't really know how the people that are using the software, how they actually work. And that was the problem, right? They basically gave requirements generally with the idea of here's how things should work, right? And so unless you're willing to change your process, there's nothing you can do about that.
And a lot of companies kind of set in their ways once you get a process going. It's kind of hard for them to deviate, and some of them just won't for the life of them want to change those processes.
Yeah, I mean, being a part of in a few cases in my career, a part of process reengineering engagements, it's very difficult to do, right? If you do one thing one way, there's you have your inputs, you have the process itself, you have the outputs. Just changing the process is more involved than a few people doing things differently. It's like, do we need different inputs? Our output's going to be a little different. That is a downstream impact to another team. The inputs have to change. That involves another team. So it's very difficult to adjust in those aspects, right? It's not that cut and dry. So it's really more or less defining not just how the new or the to-be structure looks, but understanding the existing process, what's changing, and how you communicate that. And that's a project in itself, and most people just don't want to go through that. And a lot of people know that, it's, what's the children book say? It's dressed in overalls, right? It looks like work,
Yeah.
right? And that's what it is, right? You talk about process changes, it's just dressed in overalls. Nobody wants to deal with that.
Right? Now, where do you go over from there?
So after LexisNexis, I went to Accenture. And you basically can kind of tell the way my career is progressing. I'm ultimately trying to get into deeper levels of consulting, more technology. And when you think about Accenture, they're not considered one of the big four consulting firms, but as far as implementing technology, they're probably one of the top consulting firms, and just having their hands in everything. It's a great environment, great place to work. I mean, fast-paced, immensely fast-paced, a lot of work, a lot of long hours, but you get to work with some really fantastic people. You get to learn a lot of stuff relatively quickly, right? I will say a lot of the projects I worked there from an implementation standpoint were fairly boring, right? They were just like, it's just hard work, it's just long hours, nothing like really cool or anything like that. I eventually, prior to leaving them, I started on a project with the Accenture CIO, which is an internal project, because ultimately, from a consulting standpoint, you have to stay staffed doing something, right? If you're on a bench too long, you're ultimately going to be out the door. So if you can't find an external project, and that is one of the challenges of consulting, is sometimes if you have the right relationships, you've been doing a good job, you're going to get to a point where people are, the partners that you're associated with, they're staffing you on things. Sometimes there's not something available. You may have to know someone else, but there comes points in time where you're actually responsible for making some of that happen. It's not necessarily just up to your people manager. So you really have to understand it. I will probably say that's probably the biggest lesson I learned there was you have to be very intentional on managing your career. It's not just enough to keep your head down and work hard. You have to understand where you're going, how you're going to get there, and how you build those relationships. The idea that you're just going to be rewarded for doing a great job is just not true, right? You can do the best job in the world, but people have to know about it, right? And not only do they have to know about it, they have to let other people know about it as well. So and that's ultimately, from a career progression standpoint, I think that holds a lot of people back because they don't understand that, hey, if I want to truly progress my career, I need to know who the decision makers are, and I need to be where they are. I need to be with them. I need to be around them. They have to know what I'm doing. And I think that just helped me immensely. I didn't understand that for a very long time. I just tried to go in and do a great job, do as good of a job as I can, right? If I'm managing a project on time, on budget, all those different things, making sure I'm servicing the client, making sure I'm building good relationships externally. I didn't understand it for a while until I was there, that you need to build those relationships internally as well.
Was there like a pivotal event or moment where you remember like that day, like, oh, this dawns me, I have to start doing these things? Or was it like a slow learning curve?
Yeah.
And how did you do that pivot?
Sure, absolutely. I think in consulting's probably, from an employment standpoint of career growth, is probably the only place that I've experienced where everything's laid out, right? You're going to go from an analyst, consultant, senior consultant, manager, senior manager, it's completely laid out. And how you get there from here are the competencies that you need to understand and know, that's laid out as well. Now, what's not defined is the time that it's going to take and a very specific plan on how to get. That's up to you to kind of manage. But because it's laid out, you know where you're going. So at some point, you just kind of ask yourself, wait a minute, right? It's about that time for me to move up. What's happening there, right? And then you start to have those conversations with your people manager. And you just kind of, if you have somebody that's forthcoming and they're telling you, like, here are the things you need to be doing, as the people manager I had at the time was, and you notice I'm calling them a people manager versus a like the direct boss or anything, like, because that's not the way it's set up. It's generally somebody that has a manager title that, ultimately they're not responsible for you. You're ultimately responsible for yourself. But as far as the logistics of your career, they're overseeing that, right? So it's a different environment in that aspect. But, having those conversations and being ready for a promotion is ultimately when I learned, like, wait a minute, I'm not doing the things outside of just the work itself to be promoted, and I need to do those things. So yeah, I think it was maybe the second year or so when I was like, okay, I'm doing a pretty good job here, right? I think it's time for a promotion. Having those conversations is really when I realized that I need to pivot and make a change and do something different and truly learn how to manage my career.
And out of curiosity, what helped you the most in terms of getting those promotions? Was it like letters of recommendation from the end user, the clients, or your peers to your manager or your people manager?
It's really in these environments, and I will say when I've been promoted anywhere else, it's doing the job that you set out to do, going a little bit above and beyond that. And not just what you think above and beyond is, it's also defining that with your manager and saying, like, okay, here are the things that I'm doing. Does this make sense, right? Does this make sense for the group and what we're doing as a whole? Does this make sense for the company and what we're doing? Because you can go off on and do things on your own and say, like, hey, I'm doing all this great vegetable work, but it doesn't benefit anybody, right? So you're not only just adding value to your clients and doing the work that you set out to do as it relates to whatever's in the statement of work or anything like that, but you're also adding internal value and making sure that that's communicated up the stream. I will say one of the biggest things you can do for yourself is find different proponents inside the company to make them aware of what you're doing. So you have advocates all over the place, right? So you have your general people manager, your manager that you're going to report to, and they're going to advocate for you, right? They have the relationship. But everybody that's making the decisions, they know that. So when you go in there, like, oh, hey, all right, there's Amahde Duncan, what's he doing? Your manager, oh, he's doing great, he's doing this. And then after that, if there's just general silence, then you don't have a good chance. But if he's great, he's doing this, and another person says, yeah, I interacted with him, he's doing fantastic, and another. So you have to create sort of that network of advocates, just to let everybody know how great you're doing, right? It just can't be that one person. I think that's what really benefits anybody, just my general experience, being in those conversations on both sides, sort of being in a leadership role and being in an individual contributor role where you're waiting to see what happens. That's having an advocate is going to benefit you more than anything, and just making sure that you're doing the right things.
And for some folks who want to try to emulate your career track, do you remember the first moment where you started to try to build those advocates for you? And then were there specific steps you were doing, or just kind of sharing what you're doing with your peers at the water cooler? Or what was that like?
Yeah, it's so most people, and this is what I tell, when I have team members reporting to me, this is what ultimately what I tell them is that you have to understand the structure of the organization and you have to get to know people, right? And that's the biggest thing. So, for example, if I report to someone who reports to someone who ultimately reports to someone. There's a structure. Understanding that structure and the relationship that you build don't necessarily stop with me. They have to go a little further, right? And you understand that people's time is valuable, but that doesn't mean that you can't meet with them. Hey, I need 15 minutes, once every 3 months. Just want to give you an idea of what I'm doing. I like to know a bit more about what's going on in the company. Some sort of structure where you're saying like, hey, I'm asking for some of your time. Here's how I'm going to use it. And, I won't take up very much of it. And here's how I think it'll benefit me. Here's how I think it'll benefit you. But starting those relationships, now you won't get a best friend. Yeah. But you'll get somebody in the organization that understands you. They understand what you're doing on a regular basis. And they understand the impact of that to the organization. So having that time, forcibly scheduling, having meetings with individuals, those are the things that are really going to help you more than anything. And just do it with leadership throughout the organization. If you can get it, 15 minutes on the CFO calendar, I suggest you do that, right? And most of these guys, even though they're busy, they will be open to these things, right? Especially if they're people developers. If they're focused on developing people, they'll be open to having these conversations, open to sitting down with you, as long as it's structured, it makes sense. You're not coming in just, hey, how's the weather, and, my dog died, just make it a relevant, not to say that pleasantries aren't helpful.
Of course, yeah.
But being very specific, here's how we're utilizing the time, here's how both of us get the benefit of this, is very helpful. So I can't stress enough, the relationships are very key in all of this.
Especially when you're in technology, and a lot of people, sometimes they forget that, more often than not, everything rolls up to the CFO. What do you think would be kind of like a good icebreaker, like someone who's, starting to hustle or, getting their career, like how do they reach out? And again, it could be awkward because, CFO is really high in the company. Yeah. What'd be a good tip, like icebreaker to reach out to the CFO and just kind of get their career going in the right direction and not just show that they're working hard, but also show value add to the CFO and make it a mutually beneficial type of time. Because again, their time is so valuable.
Yeah, it is.
I know a lot of folks just be so nervous just to take that first step.
Yeah, I would say it's always tough to just kind of reach out to somebody via, if you're using Teams or Slack or, via email. You may not get a response, right? Because they are busy and they're going to prioritize the things that are important and you probably fall low on that list. Sometimes I would say though, that shouldn't discourage you from just reaching out. Like, hey, I'm looking to grab some time on your calendar. Here's some things I want to talk about. I think it's worthwhile understanding what's going on in the company, the direction that it's going in. So for example, you're in a company and, we're trying to acquire this new PPM tool, right? The CFO is interested in that because it has costs associated with it, right? That he's concerned with. He doesn't want to go this subscription model, and he thinks it's too costly. Let's use what we just have today on-prem. You kind of understand the benefits of you working on it, something that he can connect with. Like, hey, you want to have a 15-minute talk about this? I'll tell you how I'm working on it. I'll tell you how it could benefit my team. Something like that he could resonate with. That may help. The second piece would be maybe you don't start with the CFO. Maybe, it's somebody else in finance, right? It's a director of finance that may be a little more accessible. And building a relationship with them, letting them know, like, hey, I'm trying to, get a conversation with your boss. What do you think? That way you can go and say, hey, Nick said I should reach out to you. And that means a lot more too. True. So it's maybe it's establishing a connection. Maybe it's taking that direct approach. That doesn't work, establishing a connection somewhere else. But also having a discussion that's meaningful. I think people will make the time if they feel like it's a meaningful conversation. But, a lot of people understand that these things help grow your career. They can understand there are hundreds of people in the company trying to build these relationships with these folks, right? So they don't want to waste their time. I don't think anybody does. I don't care what your what your level is. Like you don't want to have a conversation for the sake of having a conversation. You want to be a mentor. You want to develop people, but you want it to be meaningful. You don't want to chase it down.
Right.
So it's like, if I lay everything out, if I pretty much present you the plan and tell you, hey, what do you think? You're going to be more willing to take a look at it than say like, hey, let's talk and get a plan together.
And then how do you handle the inter-office politics? Because I know, like in some companies, if you go anywhere beyond your direct, your direct supervisor, sometimes he or she will feel like you're like burning a bridge or trying to go around them. Like, how do you navigate that situation? Because I know a lot of folks are also concerned about that. Like, do you let your direct manager know, like, hey, I want to try to reach out to CFO? Like, how does that work? Or what do you think would be the best, most productive approach for that that obstacle that some people might be afraid of?
Yeah, I think it's being direct and just saying, I think you should always let your direct manager know what you're interested in, how you're planning to grow your career, some of the things that you want to do, right? And especially if they're not asking those questions, right? Because you may be in a position and, let's say you're in implementations, but you want to be in development. And, if you don't let your manager know that, he's never going to be able to take any steps to get you there. He's never, he's never going to give you any guidance on that. It's really just focused on what's straight ahead of what the needs that he has, the things that he needs to implement within that group. But if you're direct in telling them, hey, here's what I'm interested in my career, right? I want to be promoted, or I'd like to be promoted within the next 3 years. Here's some things I'm thinking about doing in order to help facilitate that, right? That's having these discussions with you. That also includes building relationships with other, line managers within the company. And, maybe that includes the CFO. I'm thinking about reaching out to him, grab some time on his calendar. What do you think? Now, if he tells you that's not a good idea, and he gives you a reason why, then you don't go that route. You adjust, right? At that point, you just need to be like, hey, well, what do you think I should do? What is the route? Because you laid out the objective and what you're trying to achieve. Okay, well, you don't think this is a good idea. What do you suggest in me getting there, right? And you work on that thing together. And ultimately, I think that person would understand, like, oh, you need to talk to some other people as well. But I just think you have to be direct, let them know what your intentions are. Because I think most managers are probably just worried about, hey, you're going to complain about, my performance to the CEO or something like that.
Exactly.
But smart, I tend to think a lot of smart people don't think that way, in the sense of they understand, like, I want guys that are better than me working for me.
Well, that's also another issue with some managers, though, is some of them are concerned that they're going to make you look bad, or then another issue in corporate America especially is if you're doing really good at a job, you're kicking ass, taking names, so to say, the manager might not want you to leave because, well, you're doing such a great job at that specific role. Well, if you leave, they lose that productivity, they lose that team member. So I always wonder, like, how do you get around that objection? Or, I mean, how do you offer, like, to maybe train a mentee to take over for you, like, when you do get promoted? Because I know some managers, that's the biggest hesitation, and sometimes why people don't get promoted because they're doing too good at a job in their current role, which is kind of like a perverse incentive, or it's bad to do good in that situation.
Yeah, that is always a challenge, right? But, because most of your team members they're probably going to fall in the middle, right? So you're going to have some superstars, right? And those are the people like, man, I can't lose this guy.
Yeah.
If he's gone, then I have that loss in productivity. I can't afford to lose him. But what you really have to realize, and I'm not sure how you communicate this to a man, the concept of managing your manager.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But let the folks know at home, though.
Well, ultimately, what that means is you have to just sort of hands-on guide your manager into guiding you, helping them help you, right? Not necessarily help them do their job, but help them help you, right? And from a people management perspective, meaning that if they're not taking a hands-on approach to your career, you give them suggestions. You tell them, here are the things that I'm doing. How about this? What about, as I mentioned before, I'm thinking about talking to this person. What do you think, right? Or here are some skills that I think will be helpful to me and the group. can I take a course associated with this? I'm asking you guys to pay for it, but I want to take this course, get this cert, right? And most people will say yes, if it is beneficial to the group. You have to spell that out. But that doesn't mean your manager will seek you out and say, hey, I want you to get this particular cert, right? You have to push those things. You have to manage that particular process. That's sort of the best example I can think of managing, your manager. But getting back to the aspect of being sort of a high performer or a top performer within the group that you're afraid to use, or if you are that person and you're afraid your manager is going to hold you there just because they can't afford to lose you, I think it's the best approach I would take to that is really taking on a sort of a team leadership role in conducting lunch and learns, right? If it's like if your company has a open sort of or collaborative intranet or learning site where you can publish things or post things to, you're doing those things, right? So you're kind of getting exposure to other people, and you're teaching your colleagues, best practices, the way to do things, right? You're sort of ramping them up and getting them up to speed as well. So you actually get more valuable in that aspect, but you also make your team members valuable. So you're less of that, if we lose this person, things will fall apart, right? Things will fall completely apart. And I think in most cases, you have two aspects of managers. You have the guys that are like, everybody's a commodity, this could be a revolving door. We'll still do business. We'll still have our we'll still get customers out the door or bring customers in. And then you have those people that are, well, I need everybody to be here. I can't let anybody go. I tend to tell people that I manage and say, here's how I want you to develop, whether you're here or you're not here, whether you're doing this role or another role, or you're even with another company. I still want to ramp you up. I still want to get you up to speed. I still want to see you advance because it helps the team in the present day, and it's going to help you. And I think those people, when you show a level of that you want to develop them, they kind of stay around a lot longer than they, in some cases, probably than they should, because they feel that sense of, hey, I'm not just doing good, but I got a good manager. Right. And this is somebody that I'm loyal to, and I want to be attached to this person. Right. Those people, you keep high performers by treating them well, giving them the things that they need. Now, ultimately, I think all those people do go on and do something else, but I think as a manager, your job is to sort of maximize them while they're there, help them get better, and help them do the things that they want to do.
Absolutely. Plus, doing that also makes all your teammates like you because you're bringing up the whole team and you're making everyone stronger, you're making everyone better. You're kind of becoming the manager. It's the age-old saying in terms of how do you get promotion. Well, you have to do a job first for free. It's funny. It's true though. It's like you gotta act like you're doing it, and you have to keep going.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, right? There's also the guy that can just be manager-like very well, right? And they're very much liked throughout the organization. Those people go far too, right? But I think in either case, showing that ability to lead is valuable, and leading for free and not necessarily getting compensated for it. Now you can get into some of those roles where it's like, all right, this guy's doing a great job and he's doing great, and you can never get promoted, but you're doing all the things that you're supposed to. That can happen as well, but that shouldn't, people shouldn't shy away from doing these extra things that are not being compensated for that reason, right? I think that's always the case, and if that's the case, you go and you do something else, right? I'm of the frame of mind, and you could probably tell from my resume, I try to reevaluate my career like every 3 years, see where I'm at, right? Am I where I want to be? Can I do that in this current role, right? Can I do it within this current department, this current company? I think everybody should be looking at their careers that way. You don't have to do it as frequently as 3 years, but you should always be thinking about how am I progressing, and am I progressing in the way that I want to, right? Some people don't want to. They just want to just kind of like, hey, I do this job so well, I can do it in 4 hours a day, right? I get, you know, especially if you're deliverables based, right? If you're not just like, hey, I have to get certain things done, you know, you know, I can get them done in 4 hours. And that's what I need, right? I want the flexibility because I can do it in 4 hours. I can be, my schedule can be as flexible as I want, right? I work around calls or whatever that looks like. And this is what I like to do, right? I make enough money. I like the flexibility. I get to feed my family. I'm not worried about a promotion or anything like that. I just enjoy doing this because I do it well. There's you know, a lot of people like that, but there's also people that the sheer focus is to climb the ladder, right? Like I want to be VP of this organization, right? Now that's easier said than done, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that you can't work towards.
Absolutely. And then what was it like going away from Accenture? Where did you go from there?
So from Accenture, I went to KPMG. And the reason is I wanted to stay in consulting, but I wanted to get a little less technology focused. At the time, so it's a couple other factors as well. I had just finished grad school. I got my MBA at Loyola.
Oh, nice.
And I was living in Chicago at the time. And my wife's just like, I'm done with this weather. Like I can't.
It's pretty cold.
It's cold. It's
I see.
We made the mistake of starting to go to Arizona for spring training. And you start to realize that people actually live their lives outside in March. Whereas in places like Chicago, it's you just kind of hunker down, right, until summer, right? You go to work and back, and you just kind of stay in the house. It's so cold, right? You don't do much. Maybe you go sledding or whatever that looks like, but very little, right? Very little activity outdoors. So you start to realize that people are actually doing things during, you know, these periods. And you're like, well, what are we doing? We got to be doing something wrong. So, you know, the combination of that, and I think it was, we were coming back from Arizona and, you know, I think we still had on, you know, we didn't have coats. I don't want to say we had on shorts or anything like that because I think the story changes over time. But at the very least, we didn't have coats, and there was like and we parked outside, and it's like 3 feet of snow in the car, and being outside, no jackets, and you know, shoveling snow off the car after just coming from, you know, 85 degree sunny weather. You're just like, this is for the birds. You know? You know. So I had finished grad school. My wife was completely done of being cold in Chicago, and I was looking to either move into Accenture's strategy consulting group because I wanted to get a little less technology focused. More big picture technology strategy than implementing specific solutions, more or less, right? So it was either that or just kind of looking around to see what I can find and explore moving at the same time. And that's how things kind of came together. You know, I started interviewing with KPMG, and they were, when they offered me a position, they were like, hey, we got a spot in New Jersey or Dallas. And of course, I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm trying to get out of the cold. New Jersey's not going to work.
I mean, I can't help but think years later that job rec ID is probably still open for New Jersey, but that's just me.
I mean, New Jersey, it's a...
That's even colder than Chicago.
It's not as cold as Chicago because Chicago has you have that lake effect.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes the windshield a lot colder. So it's almost like here where it's like it's hot, but it feels 20 degrees hotter than temperature actually is. That's how Chicago is, right? Where it's cold, but it just feels so much colder, specifically with the wind. But yeah, but still, that's a no. That was a no. That was just a flat out no. And we were trying to get a little warmer. So that's kind of what drove me there, right? It just kind of fit for what I was looking for. More focused on the bigger picture implementation of technology versus the more hands-on work that I had been doing. So delivering, you know, bigger projects. I worked on some really great stuff while I was at KPMG. Probably my favorite engagement was a divestiture which is a really interesting project because it's ultimately you're doing the work to separate from a company, and then you're basically building the new company from scratch.
What was that like? And you don't have to say the company name, but what industry was it, and how big was it?
It's a life sciences company, pretty large. They were basically spinning off a part of. It was a previous acquisition, and they were spinning it back off.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But you were fully integrated into that company, so it's not like you were sort of this standalone piece of it. You're basically a part of it. So ultimately, what you have to figure out, what's the best way to separate, what are all the agreements associated with that separation. And they're mostly, they're a bunch of what you call TSAs, transaction service agreements, where you're ultimately saying, here's how long you're going to use our technology, right? Amongst other things. But technology is primarily the main focus because it's the most costly thing, right? How are you only going to use our system? In general, what I've seen, I've been a part of a couple of those. In general, what I've seen is people, the company gives you high prices as an incentive of getting you off their systems quick and using your own system. So you're standing up everything, right? So you're standing up HR systems, pretty much any single technology system that you can think of that your company uses today, you're basically standing that up from scratch. So that's an interesting thing to say, okay, well, it's an opportunity. So if you're using something like, SAP, do we want to do something different, right? Same thing. We're using Workday. Do we want to move away from that, move to a new system? Just because the legacy company does that doesn't necessarily, we get to do something new and different. All those different things. We also get the opportunity to shape some different processes. There's this aspect of people movement, right? Everybody doesn't stay. This particular company, it was interesting because they refused to get rid of anybody.
Really?
Yeah, which is like,
that's rare.
It's rare. It's fantastic. It's a great approach. They basically felt like, if you had a job there, you had a job for life, right? Unless, barring you did something where
of course, fireable offense. Yeah.
Right. But for the most part, you worked there, you were part of their family. So it was a unique process in the sense of figuring out how you re-bucket some of the people, right? Because you surely just don't need that entire workforce, right? Unfortunately, I mean, that's part of the job. Right? You don't need everybody. And you really start to learn that when you dig into these different processes, which is why a lot of people hate to see consultings coming, right? You see them coming through the door, right? It's like, Office Space, right? With the bobs, right? Like it's not a part of what you do to just kind of fire people, but in the sense of gaining efficiencies, a lot of times you're going to realize like, we don't need as many people. And at the same time, if is part of your engagement is just to reduce costs, generally it's unfortunately it's people, right? It's the fastest, it's the quickest, and it's the most money in most cases. But you're setting everything up. We just had to find roles for everybody, new processes. They were a projectized organization, which was really cool in the sense of like everything they did was in the form of projects.
Really?
So they had a real big PMO. So working with those guys and setting those up, so you get to work on things like that. A lot of companies generally don't have like a project intake process. Build those things. Just a very sort of creating this mature PMO. Or aspects of a mature PMO for a brand new company is a sort of an interesting thing. I shouldn't say brand new. Sort of a company with new processes is a sort of interesting thing to do.
And then how do you go about finding everyone new jobs at the same company in terms of, did you have like an HR data system of all their skill sets, or did you you have to interview them? Like, what was that process like? To me, that'd be a monumentous task. I mean, that's huge.
It is a huge task, and this was a pretty large team. So you had different people working on different aspects of those different processes. So I wasn't directly involved in that team, but we all worked. I will say most of the times we left their site, there was no place open to eat. Right, we were working some long hours. Right, it was basically those the worst projects that you could be on are projects when you don't see daylight. So you go in super early, it's dark, especially in the winter time primarily. It's dark, and when you leave, it's dark.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so those are rough. But what you do as far as people, you come up, you figure out skill sets, you figure out what people are doing. A lot of the roles translate to a very similar role, one-to-one. Not all do. But once you have your general work plans and where everybody's going to fit, then you start to look at open roles, transfer of skills. So you really just have to understand everybody's skill set. That does require some interviewing. To do that, but that's ultimately where you get. It's like, okay, and then sometimes you just have to throw people in a bucket and say, okay, we don't know where this person's going quite yet, right? But we're not getting rid of them.
Is it ever as awkward in the movie? Go, what did you say you do around here?
I mean, you don't ask that bluntly,
Of course,
but you do generally ask people about, hey, what's your day to day, right? What systems do you use? Really just digging into what they are doing, right? And it's good to get that perspective from the manager. You get that perspective from the individual, and then you just try to figure out how all these things fit together. You never look at things individually. I think you look at them holistically. The problem is you'll always find opportunities to get rid of people. You just will. It's unfortunate, but you will figure out that over time that most companies, especially if they're a little older, they're probably a little bloated, right? There's some people there where it's like, hey, we don't want to get rid of this person, right? But their job doesn't have like a ton of use, or you just get some people that are free riders, right? I'm sure you've seen companies where it's like somebody like, yeah, hey, I'm off to lunch, and they never return, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't notice, right, unless you're looking.
It kind of seems like it's almost inevitable with larger companies, because I've seen it so often, unless it's a very disciplined company and management is really active. And these big companies, you just see so many people where it's like, they'll take a 3-hour lunch. Like, it's one of those things where it's not popular to say, but there are a lot of people who have jobs who might not necessarily be necessary jobs. Like, there's a lot of fat to trim from corporate America. I know it's not popular to say, but like, I don't know, there's also more and more tools that enable people to be more efficient as well. But it's one of those things where it's like, there are a couple of jobs and a couple of redundancies. Where inevitably there are some companies where you could probably get rid of them and immediately boost efficiencies. Yeah,
and I don't think you necessarily, in most cases, I think it's tough to get rid of people when you have 10 open recs.
Yeah.
Right. I think a lot of companies don't do the due diligence of saying, can this person do this other job? Can we get them up to speed, right? Regardless of, what they had been doing in the past, and we think about the cost of recruiting. We eliminate that. We acquire some additional training costs, but we have a person, we take care of them. We know what we're getting out of them. What do we need to get them from slot A to slot B? Right. I think a lot of companies don't do that due diligence.
Agree.
So that's probably why they have people. And I think it's almost like similar to trucking in the sense of you don't necessarily need all your trucks all the time, but you need the capacity. Right. So when things do ramp up, you don't want to go out and lease new trucks. You want to just be able to use what you have. So you're going to see those ebbs and flows. Right. So nobody works. I shouldn't say nobody. Most of your organization doesn't work specifically 40 hours a week every single week, right? There's some people that work 60. There's some people that work 20. But there's also some people that work 20 hours for a month and then 80 for 2 months during that year.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So in many cases, it evens out. And it's really hard to depict that, right? So it's easier when people are more, you're not necessarily punching buttons or anything like that. It's like when you're delivering specific things. Are you getting that work done? Are you getting it done well? Those are the things that matter. But when I was at Accenture, I worked for this guy, and he always talked better, faster, cheaper. Right? That was his thing. Like, hey, we got to get better. We got to get faster. We have to get cheaper. Right. And, ultimately what that means is, you have to cut costs year over year. If you're cutting operating costs year over year, that you can't do that. In some point, it's going to be a person.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You can move things around, you can, but at some point it has to be a person.
Yeah. You can get different tools swapped out, move a few things around. And it's also, I don't know how sustainable it is long term. It's pretty easy to cut costs for a year, but it's like if you want to do that year after year after year, I mean, eventually, and I'm sure you've seen it as well in terms of end users, clients and businesses, like eventually you start to make cuts where you hurt the business, the productivity, and the customer's customers. You almost have a ripple effect. So I definitely think there's a balance, but yeah, if this just focuses, cost reduction, I mean, eventually, shoot, it's just I can't think of a single instance where that's been productive long term. Like even GE, where Jack Welch is famous for always firing the bottom 10% year over year. I mean, GE now is a shadow of what they used to be. They have 4 pillars of business now, and they're still huge, but relative to where they were, like they very much decreased in size.
Yeah, it's a tough place to find yourself, and I think most people don't think about the purpose of IT in the sense of sometimes your IT group, they may be there simply to support the back end functions, but they also may be there also part of their objectives is to reduce costs. So so when we purchase a piece of software, the ROI we're looking for is to produce enough efficiencies that ultimately we reduce our costs, our labor costs. Right. So a general function of your IT group may be simply to get rid of people.
Very true.
And so you have to really understand like what that means in terms of how does that impact me and what we're doing as a company and what's our overall strategy, right? If we're trying to just provide the best service we possibly can to our clients and to our internal stakeholders, then you have nothing to worry about, right? Because we're always doing new things, and when we implement something new, is to be better, right, at what we're doing. But you may have situations where we're doing new things in order to reduce costs, right? We're putting in this new software. It's expensive in itself, right? But ultimately, we feel like this will allow one person to do the job of 2 people. Right. And those are the things I think that get overlooked. Right. It's always just a kind of, hey, this is a new shiny new thing. But, what's the strategy? Right. If it's, hey, we're implementing Oracle instead of SQL because we have larger data sets. We need to get, we want to get information back a lot faster than what this solution is doing, then, okay, great. But if it's, we're implementing this new PPM software in order to make our project managers more efficient to the point where either they can do more themselves or we can do more with less people. You have to really just kind of dig into those things and think about them. But that is sometimes the focus or the intention of IT organizations.
Absolutely. And it's enabled so many companies to be so much radically more efficient than they used to be. I mean, there's probably more innovation in the past 5 years in IT than the past 20 years combined. It's impressive, and for some people, scary how fast it really keeps going, and how many industries and how many different job functions it's affecting.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember people were saying that the bots that everybody was developing was going to take over jobs, right? Very similar to like AI now. It's the bots they're building all these bots and they're going to take over all these functions. And I think kind of what it comes down to, and people always ask me about, my job as like in being in delivery role and overseeing the implementation of these different technologies. Like, hey, you're not going to have a job pretty soon. And they might be right. It'll come at some point. But the reason I do have a job because most companies don't do this stuff well. Right. And so it's a similar thing with the bots in the sense of, hey, there's this great technology out there, but how do we fit it into our organization in a way that makes sense? That's when you need, people like me. But things have advanced, and the reason I mentioned the bots because you said the sort of how quickly things moved. It amazes me how quickly people moved away from that to the next thing. Oh, yeah. Right. So it was like a flash of that. There's still they're probably used more by individual programmers for stuff like social media and little smaller tasks. But from an enterprise application perspective, that kind of went away.
It's one of those, kind of like sales too. It's like one of those things where there's any tech, it's like there's a shiny new topic for a while. It gets a lot of media attention, a lot of venture capital funding gets thrown into it. And And then, the product actually has to work and make a profit, be productive. And that's where I think sometimes you see stagnate or kind of a slowdown. I mean, bots absolutely have their place in terms of like, I know a lot of companies nearly all of them have them for customer support on their websites, which I would argue most people hate, but they're kind of rudimentary, but they're getting better. But it seems like when there's a new tech, it's always promising the world and delivering, a little bit. I mean, I think that's why maybe so many executives or so many leadership decision makers don't like to be the first adopters because they're promised so much, but delivered relatively so little compared to the vision that they're selling. So, I mean, bots, shoot, now every company basically has them on their website, and they'll provide you more often than not the rudimentary data, like where's my package, what's the package number, the tracking number, all that kind of stuff. Just because I kind of default to e-commerce when I think about most websites these days. But yeah, I think they'll get advanced stuff where they actually help you truly troubleshoot problems. But there's that pivotal moment in the conversation where you'll want to talk to a real person on the phone. But yeah, everything. Salesforce, they're talking about the bot integration with their website or their offerings, so you can offer it to your customers. It was all anyone was talking about for so long.
Yeah.
And now you cannot read a single headline or even look at a single IT product without them saying, "Oh yeah, it's got AI built in."
That's right.
It's like, great. How does it actually work though? And it's like, part of me does suspect some marketing folks just throw it in there because it has to be in everything in IT these days. But in some cases, it's got some real world, really impressive applications.
Yeah, so in the role I do now, I oversee the delivery of AI ML into a lot of our solutions, a lot of our customer facing solutions, as well as some internal stuff that we're doing, and it's one of those things where it's like you have to think about, we have to have it. You have to have it. Everybody has to have some AI function.
Yeah.
If you're selling a software solution, to an external client, they want to know what you're doing in AI space. But I also think you need a very specific strategy. And I think that's where people went wrong with the bots and saying, like, hey, here's all these wonderful things that, this technology can do. It's a very similar thing with AI. But how do we utilize it is something very different. I really think a lot of companies are looking at how does AI fit into our processes, this is the way we do things. And I think the reverse of that needs to happen in the sense of you need to think about how do we build around this technology? How do we change our processes? How do we utilize this thing to do more than what we do today versus this overall enhancement? You always run into that with companies. And I think that's the slowness of the adoption of people saying like, I don't know about this. Let me wait and see. Like, let me wait for the next thing. But a lot of those companies are always waiting for something. And the second piece is a lot of the projects I worked on at KPMG, you don't have a lot of people. You go into a lot of companies and, these gigantic companies, and you'd be surprised of some of their processes. But a lot of people don't have a method of measuring when they do these things, like what's the real return on investment. So, if you're going to hire somebody like a Bain or McKinsey or KPMG to implement some sort of AI solution, you're going to spend, $30-40 million. How do I know that turns into $100 million worth of profit or whatever I'm expecting, even if they say that's what's in the SOW.
Yeah.
But most companies don't have a means of actually measuring that function and saying, is this really working for us? Is this efficient, right? How can you measure efficiency if you don't know how fast or slow something takes within your organization?
Exactly.
The company I worked for after KPMG, I was actually working there. One of the directors I worked with at KPMG, he had moved there and he had brought me in because I wanted to get off the road. And he's like, new software company, startup, that's just, they were growing so fast that, you're just going to create a ton of challenges, specifically with, pushing things out to clients. And he's like, hey, we have all these challenges. I know you can help me with this, just kind of based on I've worked with them before. And one of the first things I asked them, I'm like, they wanted to kind of control the cost around implementing the software to clients. And I'm like, well, how much does it cost to implement, Nobody can ask. Nobody in the organization can tell you. It's because nobody knows, right? But there's this idea that we need to control the cost. Our costs are getting out of control.
Yeah.
But if you really don't know specifically how much it costs to get a client out the door, you can't control those costs, right? And most companies don't have those measurements in place. And it's a similar thing if they implement anything like it. It's really more or less like it's easier to see with the PMO because they're primarily establishing KPIs and things of that nature where they typically have benefit realization if they're a mature organization. All these different processes that kind of bring these things together, and they're making sure that they're tracking benefits and they understand what they should be. But most organizations, they just do things.
Yeah.
Right. So that hesitancy comes from all of that, where it's like, even if we did this, we don't know what value we're going to get out of this.
Yeah.
So let's just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Status quo.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then out of curiosity, so was that strictly a software company?
It's a fintech company. Yeah. So they basically. Go ahead.
Well, what was it like going from consulting to actually working directly at a software manufacturer? Because that's night and day difference. Because, that's from implementing technologies and organizing, and optimizing, and then you're actually making the product. And what was that like? And did you prefer it?
Yeah, it's because it was client facing. You still had that aspect. So you still had the client interaction piece of it. I will say. It was probably more of a challenge being in a company so young because they have a lot of things that they want to do, but they also have a lot of internal challenges. And your growth ultimately doesn't always necessarily push down to the rest of the organization. It's almost like you see these kids that have like these growth spurts, and then they equate them to a giraffe, where they're so big and they're awkward, and it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, we need to grow, and we are growing, but are we doing things internally at the same pace of our growth? Right. It just causes it was a tough job. In that aspect of dealing with some of those challenges, right? And still you have clients to serve in a certain way, and there are other factors that I had to deal with that I never dealt with before.
Like what?
Well, I managed more people. So I managed people when I was at KPMG, but not so many, right? And I think you can only have so many direct reports. But we did a restructuring. I think that kind of helped with that a lot.
How many were there at their peak?
13.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a lot.
It's a lot to really develop and help those people facilitate their career and do the things that they need to do, and just kind of really be hands-on. It's a ton of people, right? They're just kind of doing their own thing and reporting to you. It's not. But if you're really valuing what they're doing and you're trying to help them move forward, it's really, really, really difficult.
Well, especially if you're trying to mentor them, help them grow and develop their skill sets, like that takes, people realize that takes a lot of time.
It takes a great deal of time. So you can almost focus on, I would say, if I'm starting my own company from scratch, right? I have people managers and performance managers, right? Because it's hard to do both, right? And it's hard to really make sure that everybody has what they need from a career perspective, and even a personal perspective from that aspect. Because I think one of the things we tend to overlook is what's going on in your life is sometimes going to depict how well you do at your job. Right, and you kind of need to know those things, right? So, for example, if I have somebody that's leaving at 3:00 every day, right? Is this person just blowing off the job every day at 3:00, or do they need to pick up their kids? Right, those are very different things, right? And you need to have a conversation around like, okay, well, what does that mean? So a person leaving at 3:00 every day, they have to pick up their kids, which is a valid reason, but how does that look to the rest of the team? like, hey, this guy's, I don't care. I have kids too, right? So, so you have to be able to understand that person, what they need, understand members of your team. And you call those things out. Like, hey, this person here, but they're working, you may not do it directly. You find some way to do it, but, hey, I seen you online.
Or he's working through lunch. He's here an hour early, or his productivity was X, Y, Z. I mean, every statistical analysis, or all the quantifiable things we can point at, say, oh, he's going above and beyond. But yeah, that could definitely be an issue in terms of just like, just that optics of someone leaving early. It can create all of a sudden there's some team interconflict or jealousy, and that's whole job in and of itself is just managing the team, the expectations, the culture, and the attitudes of everyone. And that's a huge task, especially if you've got 13 folks that you're working with.
Yeah, it's a tough dynamic, right? And you want to perform, right? Sure. Everybody wants high performers. Everybody wants, people that can deliver, as I mentioned, better, faster, right? They want people performing at a high level. And this particular company, they need one of the things they needed to do from a cost perspective is they need to scale the delivery of their software, right? And one thing if you haven't noticed at this point, people don't scale. Processes scale, the things around people can scale, but people don't scale, right? You ultimately, if you can manage, 2 projects, if you have that capability, you're always going to manage 2 projects. I don't care what kind of tools I give you.
Yeah.
Right. So unless I gave you something that was like 100%, or I should say very close to highly automated, that ultimately the workload was the same. And then at that point, even you're still probably adding on one additional one.
Yeah.
Right. So so you have a situation where you need to scale the productivity of your team members, but it's just not that, nothing allows for that. Right. So that's a challenge, right? Because that also then becomes a performance thing for not the individual team member, but as a team, in the sense of, hey, if we're implementing, 30 clients a year, we need you as a company to do 50. If you can never get there, that's you just can't.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a problem. It ultimately becomes a problem. So whether or not, from a leadership perspective, they see that as we need to adjust our expectations. That just depends on the leadership, right? And that whether or not you can convince them of that, we need to be doing less because we can only go, so we're maximizing what we can do. Your ability to do that just is the ability of how well you can actually, frame that conversation and do your job. So that's ultimately why it was so challenging. Those were the real different aspects. But I will say, as far as similarities of consulting and moving into that type of role, is as a consultant, I think the majority of your job is solving problems. And you actually kind of live and breathe that. And ultimately that becomes a part of who you are, even as a person, right? It's just like you're always coming in a situation like, you might have some people that, people are like, here's how I would do this, or, sometimes people frown upon that. But that's just generally how you think, right? If you think about something like, how could it be better? How could it be different? How could it be more efficient? You just start to think that way. And I think that aspect was very helpful to that job, right? Because I think I did, the short time I was there, I think I did a lot of great things to improve, that department. I think a lot of the stuff that I instilled, they're still using today. Even though I think they've changed the overall structure of that group quite a bit because of the things that I mentioned as far as that scalability. It just couldn't happen within that structure, right? So I think quite a few things have changed, but I think there are some of the things that I instilled while I was there, I think they're still using.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I try to, it's great for me when I can make an impact on an organization and do something that's just kind of outside of the job itself, in the sense of, hey, this really helped us, take a leap forward, even if it's just for a short period of time. I find a lot of satisfaction in that. And that's why I love, IT. That's why it's because you get that immediate satisfaction, right? Specifically in delivering and actually delivering an IT solution where, like, we put this process in place. We put this piece of software in place to support that process. They're using it, and because of that, they're saving, 300 hours a week, with this particular team. Like, there's not a lot where you could say, here's this tangible result of this thing that I did. So that's really one of the aspects of doing the work that I do that makes it, beneficial to me, and one of the reasons I like it.
Absolutely. And then where'd you go after the software company?
From there, I went to, I sort of left there abruptly just because I'm like, it just wasn't the right environment for me. So I went to CDW.
There you go.
Which, most people...
Small mom and pop shop out of Illinois. They're up and coming.
Yeah. It's like, most people know CDW from, their stores if you're buying computer parts and things like that years ago. But they're primarily a services company. Now, sort of, similar to that change that IBM made, where it's like, hey, we're not manufacturing anymore. We're going to services. They're like, hey, we're not, although they still sell,
of course,
some computers, but they're primarily service focused. And I started working there, overseeing the implementation of security solutions for different clients, software like Okta, SailPoint, different single sign-on solutions, Ping, like all those, cool things. I had worked when I was at Accenture. I worked on some ADFS stuff, some, different federations, some single sign-on stuff there. So I had some knowledge, of the space, but it's really the first time I was, completely focused on security and a security solution. I will say, although different technology, different types of clients, all clients want the same thing, right? They want you to deliver them a product on time, right? They want it to work, and they want it to work as they intended. And from a delivery perspective, it's, fits into the same box, right? As far as the core structure, even though it's a completely different solution. The only difference in this aspect is, there's no room for error, right? You implement a security system, and it has to let people in, has to keep certain people out, right? So you're dealing with that aspect of it. You're also dealing with the sensitive nature of dealing with a security solution, right? Because in most cases, you're integrating with the company's Active Directory, all these. Clients are real sensitive about, is this going to work? Is it not? But I will say, ironically, the aspect that was peculiar about, or that was funny about CDW, is that scale problem that that I had previously come away from. Yeah, they had the same challenge.
Really?
Right. Yeah, and for a very different reason, and it was mainly because to compete with companies like a KPMG, McKinsey, like all these different places that are doing similar implementations, right? They're implementing, these security solutions for other companies. They're not necessarily doing them as core engagements. They're generally doing them as a part of other engagements. But you have to compete with those guys. So you compete with them with the idea, I can do it quicker, I can do it, cheaper. And as you've probably experienced yourself with a lot of these projects, if they say it's going to take 6 months, it's going to take, a year, right? And that's mainly because it's not, and it's the same thing with software development, right? And I experience this now. We're only going to go as fast as we can develop this stuff, right? And, when you're implementing specifically for external clients, you're only going to be able to go as fast as the client goes.
Yep.
Right. So you can want to implement something. It actually may take 6 months, but you're not necessarily factoring in, is the client available? Most clients aren't going to dedicate the resources on their side that it takes to actually get this done in 6 months, right? Most of the clients that I work with, regardless of from the start of my career until now, everybody that works on a project has a day job,
Yep.
that they need
Yep.
to get done, right? And even though they've been assigned to that particular project to help you out as a vendor, they still have their job that they need to do and get done, right? And this is just one of those extra things, and the day job is going to take priority. So managing an external person, an external resources schedule is impossible, right? And you need, and when you're talking about a security implementation, you're talking about IT people, you need these people. It's not, you're just not gathering requirements or anything. Like, you need them not just to be in meetings and answer questions, you need them, they have tasks, right? So in most cases, we're not going in and having complete access to individual security systems. We need to direct people on what they should be doing, things they should be installing, accounts they should be creating, et cetera, to allow us to do the work that we need to do, right? We have very limited access in most cases. So getting people to do those things, take on tasks, troubleshoot, things like that is ultimately what prolongs these things. So if you could think about, we have a 6-month engagement that now goes 9 months, you know, normally they're fixed priced. So you can't, you can't charge more. And, you know, you didn't do this thing in a way where it's a range. Like a good SOW has a range. Good statement of work has a range of for the fees, right? Up until this many hours, we won't go over this.
Precisely.
But, you know, you do something fixed fee, it's going to take you a while to get it done. You're going over. So, and if that continues to happen, you run into this factor of, hey, we need to do more of these, right? In order to get to where we need to be and stay where we need to be. So they long and short, they had a very similar problem, different industry, but in the sense of we need to do more with less. They I think they met that challenge a lot better. But I think also it down the line, it probably causes more problems than I could see, just anecdotally, you know, looking at it.
Absolutely. Then what decided you to go to the end user at the end of the day? So then you joined a CBRE, right?
Yeah, I did. I think it was just a great opportunity. I will say that working at places like, you know, KPMG and Accenture is, you know, and the combination of LinkedIn it's a very good thing to have on your resume in the sense of people understand that you've been a part of, you know, some really large projects and, you know, things of that nature. So I have people reaching out to me all the time via LinkedIn, and sometimes, unfortunately, I don't check LinkedIn as much as I should. But somebody reached out to me with an opportunity. It was just good timing, right? A lot of things I liked about the company. Just kind of going internal. I did want to get away from external clients, like completely, or as much as I could, just because that's a grind, right? Just being. You know, I don't necessarily mind being accountable, but dealing with sort of going to back-to-back situations where I had very little control on how things started, but I was responsible for, you know, the delivery within a certain structure that I have any control of. That's a tough thing to deal with, right? It's very hard to, you know, it's another thing to manage a challenging project where you can pull different levers, right, and get things done within whatever framework you can, or you know, move some things around, you get it done. Like, that's exciting. Yeah. But when you have no levers to pull, you're just getting beat over the head by, you know, all sides. So that kind of, you know, you just kind of get a little tired of that and just like, okay,
gets a little old.
Yeah, you know, it gets old. And so I did want to, you know, not client facing. I felt like, you know, I think you get a little like, oh man, they're in commercial real estate. That market's not, you know, super hot right now, with, you know, people being at home and offices not completely staffed. But I felt like as far as them being just a general leader in that space, what they were doing with technology, the direction that they were going in. I think as we sort of see these fluctuations in commercial real estate, I think the technologies they produce are going to they're going to be a greater need for those across the board. So I was like, you know what, this is a good space, good technology, doing the work that I like to do. I think I'll give it a try. I'll give it a shot. And the person I report to now, I think we developed a great rapport in a short period of time. And one of the things that I think I've had probably the most successful parts of my career is when I enjoyed somebody that I worked for and enjoyed working for them and just knowing that they have your best interests in mind. I think you just kind of excel there. So that was a bonus as well.
Absolutely, that makes all the difference in the world. Is who is the age-old saying is you don't quit companies because of the CEO, you quit because of your direct manager.
Yeah,
it's like the person who has one of the biggest impacts on your day-to-day life. They could make or break that job.
Absolutely, yeah. It's such a selling point, and I'm so big on managing and people development.
We will be right back. We're going to go to a quick commercial break from our very handsome sponsor, Topping Technologies. Free Flamethrower with every IT purchase. Go to toppingtechnologies.com to learn more. And then what's the biggest reason you want to go to CBRE? Because I mean, they're not just a real estate company. They're the number one on the planet for commercial real estate.
Yeah, I think just in general, I think they're a leader in the space. They produce a lot of great technologies or a lot of great real estate solutions. And if you're into IT, you're into technology, you want to go for you want to be with a company that has a valuable solution that produces great work. You just want to be a part of that, and that's just something that I want to be a part of. I believe in their technologies. I think they're not just a leader in the space, but I think they're advancing. I think they're pushing things forward from just an AI perspective, which is where the direction everybody's going, and they're actually leading in that space as well, and already has AI products out there.
What do you think? What product are you most proud of, or one that really you looked at, you go, that's a difference maker, so to say?
Well, so one of the products I work on now produces insights via AI, and it's a solution that we're delivering. We're continuing to improve and deliver new functions on, but it's one of those things where you say like, hey, I think this is good now, but I think this is going to be a difference maker in the marketplace in the future. So, for example, if you think about your office building and you're managing it, we're providing insights along the lines of, here are the different things you need to do throughout your building, whether that relates to just general maintenance or some things you can do from a profitability standpoint. I think producing insights and information like that to real estate investors, real estate companies, I think it's valuable, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface with some of that stuff. So that's just one of the solutions that I'm working with, delivering and just helping move forward overall, that I think will really push software solutions in real estate to the point where I think you want them to be sort of self-sustaining, where you're not using our solution and something else. It's really more or less this one-stop shop or this product where you can go in and just get a suite and really understand the properties that you own. I think overall, just from they say these days that every company is a technology company.
They just don't know it yet.
Right. But I think we really are. Right. I think most people would think of us as a real estate company, but the software we build, all our solutions are internal. We're doing a lot of great things to service our clients. And I love the fact that the company's client focused. It's always a positive to me. So when you're delivering software to clients out there, you want to deliver something that they can actually use, right? And something that you can be proud of. I work with some really great teams, some really smart programmers, a lot of data scientists, So I learn a lot on a database on a daily basis. Some things like one of the things I'm learning about right now is data cubes and really understanding that.
What's that for the folks who might not know?
So a data cube, the best way I can explain it, is it's almost like this three-dimensional array of storing data, right? So it gives you the ability to store more versions of it. So if you think about a table per se, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to cache a row of data so that when you call it again, you get that data back faster. What a data queue will allow you to do is store multiple versions of that, right? So different breakups. So in other words, multiple rows, different slices of that data, so that, we can bring back different versions of that data a lot quicker, right? So it's ultimately, when you think about AI answering questions and parsing through all this data faster, helps facilitate that. So we're getting you information back without, querying an entire table and then slicing and dicing that data when you make that request.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So throughout, I think it's always fun for me to learn new stuff, right? I find that fascinating. Even though I may not be, programming these days or anything like that, but I think it's always good to learn more about the technology that I'm implementing.
Absolutely. And what do you like to do outside the office these days?
Oh man. So I have 3 kids. My kids are a little older now. 2 kids that are in college, and for a long time, my life kind of revolved around them. Even though I still have my youngest at home. So my son plays a lot of baseball. My daughter played basketball. So you spend a lot of time facilitating that process, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's going to games, practice, things like that. And I used to train my son quite a bit. So as far as like, hitting, fielding, a lot of gym work, things like that. Used to spend a ton of time doing those things. But either way, we still get some time in the summer, but for the most part. So I enjoy working out now that I have a little more free time, just kind of, on my own. Although I do have my youngest daughter. She's starting to go to the gym with me in the summer.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that's been a positive. I really enjoy spending that additional time with her, right? She's a teenager in the true sense these days. So having sort of a different dynamic to our relationship, I think is pretty cool, right? So, try to work out, at least 5 days a week.
Nice. What's your favorite thing to do at the gym?
Oh, man. I don't know if I have a favorite per se, and mainly because I try to get that out of my head, because I think you tend to go back to your favorites, right? Maybe a little bit too frequently. I don't know. I've been more into leg exercises lately, just because I think when I probably initially started working out, I didn't pay as much attention. Like, you did the exercise, but I never did legs exercises from the perspective of building, those muscles. I think you just kind of did it to be stronger, but I'm really more focused on the muscle development of, the quads and things of that. So I would say that's probably, if I had to say something's my favorite, that's probably it right now. Otherwise I just kind of love to get in there, right? And it's always fun when you see people at the gym like all the time and you never talk to them at that time, and they finally say something to you, right? And you realize, like, I've been watching you this whole time. Like, for example, anytime I used to work out so much with my son, I think that's what people say the most is like, hey, where's your son? You're not in here with your son? And things like that. It's like, how do you know I come here with my son? That type of thing. So, it's a lot of fun. Just I find it good as just a general habit. Be healthy. All this research coming out now about how being stronger just helps you live longer, things like that, And so it's just fun. It's just one of those things where, you just kind of adopt and you just kind of have fun doing it. I haven't golfed in a long time. I'm thinking about picking that back up. And I just think it's one of those things that, although I've been invited golf is one of those games you got to play, right?
Yeah.
You know, you got to play or you get out there and it's just, you know, you have to play consistently. So I think now that I have a little more time, I think there's an opportunity for that. I could play a lot more, you know, and so I'm thinking about picking that back up, you know, and seeing how that goes. I'm afraid, you know, just because it's been so long, and I'm not like a lifelong golfer. I did pick it up as an adult, but you know, something I also think that's kind of, you know, fun and relaxing and things like that. So yeah, I think that's, you know, that's generally it. And you know, hanging out with my family is probably, you know, what I love to do the most. And you know, I think that just spending time and you know, having that level of communication with them is probably, you know, the thing I really love. I enjoy like hearing the kid perspective. I enjoy hearing things from my wife and how they see things, you know, especially as it relates to just something going on in the news or just something that they saw on TikTok. You know, I love that stuff.
What's your favorite family activity?
I don't know. We enjoy sporting events. We're a big sports family.
Who's your team?
As far as for baseball, you know, it's White Sox. We do follow the Cubs. My son's a big Cubs fan, just because, you know, we do all things Chicago.
Makes sense.
Basically, I'm a Bears. Any Chicago sports team, I go. Although we do go to a lot of Rangers games. You know, just because we enjoy baseball. We're a big baseball family. Try to catch any college baseball we can as well. So that's just one sport that we love, and we'll indulge in it as much as we can. I'm not a Cowboys fan.
No?
Although I've only been to one Cowboys game just because it's not that accessible.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't necessarily hate the Cowboys. I wish them well because we're here.
I was about to say, you can't say that in DFW.
You know what? I want them to do well just because when they are doing well, everybody else around me is happy. So I don't mind necessarily seeing that. And I get tired of people just, you know, when they're not doing well, the looks on everybody's faces is just everybody's in this deep depression.
Oh, people get really emotionally invested in that team. It's a big parts of people's personality. You know, they don't own the team, or I don't know. Yeah, a lot of people are very invested in the sports balls.
Yeah. So and the you know, Stars have been doing great, so it's been good. You know, it's great when I love hockey live. TV doesn't do hockey justice.
No, it doesn't. It's got to see it in person.
Yeah. So live, it's amazing. I think you have to, if you don't enjoy hockey, I think you have to go see it live, and then I think it'll be a better experience on the television, because you'll get a true feel for how athletic and gigantic these guys are, and they just glide across the ice. It's amazing to see. But yeah, I think in general, that's it. I thought about, you know, pickleball's the rage. I thought about trying to do that.
Oh, yeah.
We used to live over in Sunset Point. There's a pickleball course that I was riding my bike with my son. We were riding bikes, and we saw a court over there. So that may be an excuse to still do that.
There you go. That sounds like a good plan to me.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I appreciate you taking time to come to the show, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Also, don't forget to take the time to tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe. You have a great day. Topping Talks.